It's true that we are not speaking very often about legacy system, and as you can see on the presentation which is shared, that we frequently identified 4 triggers that will force people to think a little bit more about legacy systems. The first one is digitalization, and throughout all the issues that just happened and all the transformation that need to be made to cope with the current situation, digitalization has been at the heart of many transformation in our parliaments. Efficiency, because if you want to invest in new system, of course you cannot spend this amount for other systems, and very often if you want to use your resources for new information system, you will have to put the pressure to the legacy systems, and this is just because you very frequently do not have an increase of budget. Also technical obsolescence. While once we buy software or we develop, then it is very frequent that after a period of time, there is a new release which is available, and then we need to deploy. And these obsolescence come also from the technical side. And the last one is about compliance. While we are in a world where regularly are evolving the regulatory context, the legal context, the rules of procedures. And we have seen that during the COVID-19 period, many parliaments has to evolve their rules to enable voting in distance or remote participation to some meetings, or also to adapt some laws for digital signatures, some rules for digital signatures, for instance. So compliance is also a domain that will force to think a little bit about what happens with the legacy systems. How do we keep them? Do we evolve them? Do we change them? So there are many challenges in this one. And the last one is, of course, when we have a legacy system and we want to modernize, what is the question about the data? So how do we do with the data and everything that was digitally produced? When it was a paper, it's easy to archive. You put a box in a room and then you can find everything. But when this is digital and you want to replace an information system by a new one, what happens with the data that you archived? Are you still able to access them in quite easy way in ways of question? So the question of archiving is behind the scene and flying around with the challenges related to legacy systems. But out of these 4 points I just enumerated, I'm very happy to welcome Alessandro and Grant to participate in this panel. Alessandro is a postgraduate in computer science, and he has been involved with electronics, computing, and software engineering since the 90s. More recently, he has been working in IT management and is currently taking an MBA in the same subject. And Grant is a CEO and co-founder of Xcential Legislative Technologies, a company dedicated to digital-first drafting solutions in San Diego, California. With a background in electronics design and computer-aided engineering, Grant entered the legal informatics field 2 decades ago. Grant is one of the 4 primary members of the OASIS Legal Documents ML Technical Committee, the committee responsible for the standardization in ACOMA and TOZO. So welcome to both of you. How this panel will be put in practice? There will be 2 questions that will be sent to the panelists, to Alessandro, to Grant, and there will be an opportunity to raise questions in the chat. So if you are willing to ask questions, please feel free to send them in the chat or write them in the chat, and we will address them during 10 minutes at the end of the panel presentation. So my first question will go to Alessandro. Alessandro, are legacy systems a burden to be totally discarded?
Obrigado pela pergunta, Ludovic. Bom dia, boa tarde para os seus horários diferentes. Primeiramente, eu agradeço mais uma vez o convite da Bússola Tech para estar aqui apresentando o nosso trabalho, a nossa opinião. É um prazer revê-lo, meu amigo, meu colega que vi em Genebra há 2 ou 3 anos. Enfim, sobre os sistemas legados, né? A gente se pergunta se eles são realmente um fardo a ser, enfim, totalmente descartado e dispensado. No Senado Federal brasileiro, praticamente não temos mais nenhum legado, algum sistema muito antigo, em plataformas muito antigas, como Natural, Adabas, não temos mais, mas passamos por processos de modernização, né? Eu acho que o principal que a gente tem que entender, na minha opinião, é que cada caso é um caso. Evidentemente que um produto em Natural, Adabas, não tem como continuar, né? Então você precisa salvar alguma coisa dele, especialmente os dados. Então depende de que tecnologia essa aplicação, esse sistema está construído, e é o que vai determinar o que eu vou aproveitar. Então, os dados, assim, a nossa TI, né, ela tem 50 anos lá no Senado Federal, então tem muitos dados muito antigos que têm sua utilidade ainda hoje. Então, os sistemas mais antigos, nós aproveitamos os dados, que são uma riqueza, né, serão sempre de valor, terão sempre valor. Num outro patamar, o que a gente pode aproveitar são as regras de negócio, né, programadas, codificadas naquele sistema. Por que eu digo isso? Porque a determinada tecnologia não permite uma usabilidade boa, né, não permite funcionalidades melhores, mas ele tem tanta regra de negócio que foi difícil construir para processar o dado e os dados em si, que eu posso, então, fatiar esse legado em 3 pedaços, né, e aproveitar 2/3 dele, né, regras e dados. Então, eu dou um exemplo aqui recente, nós usamos, recente, nem tão recente no Senado, nós usamos o Oracle Forms por muitos anos. Hoje seria uma ferramenta de low-code, né, similar a uma ferramenta de low-code. Atendeu por muitos anos o Senado Federal, mas é uma tecnologia que chegou ao seu limite, né? Por exemplo, segurança, que é o que a gente deve falar aqui durante o evento. O applet é inseguro, né? Já nem é usado mais, nem roda mais. Então, nós trocamos a interface gráfica dos sistemas, mas mantivemos os dados e as regras de negócio. Então, o legado é relativo se nós vamos aposentá-los totalmente ou não.
Thank you very much for this detailed answer, and I will come back to one of the points that you mentioned in additional questions if we have the opportunity. Grant, based on your experience with legislative and regulatory software solutions, what has been the acceptance of Acoma and TOZO standard, and what are the remaining barriers for the adoption?
All right. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
All right. So first of all, we've always at Xcential been proponents of standards. Way back 20 years ago, we had seen the need for standards, and we had gone to the OASIS committee and proposed a standard. And back then, there was very little interest. Although we got a committee up and running, it quickly faded out because there just wasn't interest in the field to have a standard, and we moved on. About 11 years ago, we came across the work being done at the United Nations and in the University of Bologna. And they were on the same path, building a standard, which we know as Acoma and TOZO. Seeing that it was what we had always looked for and always wanted, we quickly decided to pin our future on Acoma and TOZO and to do whatever we could as a company to make that standard happen. And become strong participants and advocates for the development of a standard. Back then, there was still a lot of resistance to there being a standard at all. And mostly because people either didn't see the need or largely didn't believe it was possible to have a standard that would cover all the different legal traditions around the world. And we were able to prove them wrong. And through a long process, we've come up with a Acoma and TOZO standard. It's taken a lot longer than we ever thought it would take. But today, we don't debate whether there's a need for a standard. We have a standard. We don't debate whether it's possible. It's possible. We know it's possible, and we have examples. And that standard is known as Acoma and TOZO, for better or worse. It's been in place for a few years now, but there's still much work to be done to really see the value and achieve the value that Acoma and TOZO brings. At Xcential, we've only just started rolling out products that can build on top of Acoma and TOZO. For us, the adoption curve has been very slow. part of the reason for that slowness is that governments are by nature very risk adverse. No one wants to be first. No one wants to jump in and be the guinea pig. So we end up having to slowly edge people on towards becoming that early adopter. Today we have a few jurisdictions around the world that have chosen to come along with us on this ride. So we're starting to now get the momentum going that we've been working on. So we're hoping that as this momentum starts to build now, we will start having use cases, examples where this has been applied in different traditions around the world, in the US state tradition, federal tradition, Westminster tradition. We're exploring different traditions and adapting a common TOSA to those needs. As those use cases become successes and are deployed, I think that will lower the risk for most other jurisdictions, and they'll be ready to make the step forward.
If you just allow me one additional question on ICOMA and TOSA, while we were quite early adopters in the Parliament with one of the person working for me, Mr. Gianluigi Alari, that was also part of this initial group. When you establish a standard, did you have to kind of compete with other standards that were present or other emerging standards at this time being, or was it a real start from scratch where you had to build everything from the standard and try to gather the best experience from early adopters?
There had been, in the case of a common TOSA, there had been a few earlier efforts, largely by the same people, particularly at the University of Bologna, but those efforts had already started to fade, so they weren't competitive in nature for us. This was something where we were moving forward. Where we are competing more is not so much against standards, it's against existing schemas that people have built in-house and now have to either replace or adapt somehow to be compatible with a common TOSA.
Thank you very much. Alessandro, according to you, what are the main issues for IT and users with legacy systems? Just if you can hear me now.
Yes.
What are the main issues for IT and users with legacy systems?
Okay, I understand now. Eu vou falar em português, I will speak in Portuguese. Então, como eu dizia, quais são os principais problemas, né, as principais questões para a equipe de TI e para os usuários em relação aos sistemas legados? Eu mencionei antes as oportunidades em função dos dados e das regras de negócio que podem ser reaproveitadas no sistema respectivo, né, resultante da modernização daquele sistema, mas a verdade é que são grandes riscos de negócio, né, você manter sistemas muito antigos no seu ambiente computacional. O principal deles é a falta de pessoal. A tecnologia fica antiga demais, não tem mais profissionais no mercado disponíveis, e se houver, serão extremamente caros. Então, isso já é um primeiro problema. Muitos desses produtos já não têm suporte, né, do seu fabricante, não recebem atualizações, então se torna um problema de segurança da informação, né? A gente tem visto aí ataques recentes que exploram produtos construídos há 20 anos, componentes de impressão, componentes de leitura de documentos PDF, construídos há muitos anos. ActiveX, né, tem uma recente vulnerabilidade sobre isso da semana passada, né, porque são softwares antigos ainda rodando, né? Então, esse é o grande problema para a TI. Falta de pessoal, problema de segurança e a própria linguagem de programação, às vezes, que está ali construindo aquele produto, não tem mais recursos disponíveis de programação que entregue uma funcionalidade aceitável, né, para o século XXI, para o ano de 2021. Já para os usuários, são os que sofrem mais, né, não só pelas questões de segurança, mas porque perdem funcionalidades, né, perdem em novas telas, novas formas, por exemplo, mobile, né, muitas linguagens do passado não funcionam mais, né, em dispositivos móveis. Um recurso principal, assim, importante, que a usabilidade eu mencionei, perde-se usabilidade, mas a acessibilidade. Por exemplo, nós temos parlamentares com deficiências motoras. Então, são tecnologias modernas que possibilitam com que esse parlamentar participe das discussões. Então, O sistema legado há oportunidades em sua migração, em sua modernização? Há, mas tem que tomar cuidado para fazer isso no ponto certo. Não pode descartar os dados, mas também você não pode deixar a tecnologia muito defasada a ponto de perder segurança, funcionalidade, usabilidade, etc.
Thank you very much. It's completely true that the recent focus put on accessibility is something that had a very huge impact, and I can only share because we had the internal assessment with the expectation to have a YAA compliance to be achieved by November this year, and many people are working to update all the websites to cope with this standard. So it's absolutely true that, as you mentioned, accessibility became very recently a point definitively to focus on. Grant, governments often lack the motivation to undertake expensive and risky modernization efforts. As you just mentioned, we are quite risk adverse in administration, and that's perfectly right. However, what are the consequences of these postponements, and what can be done to alleviate the situation?
Yes, what we find is that more often than not, we're coming into a situation with our customers where they have put off modernization for far too long, sometimes for decades, and the consequence of that has been, as they put off modernization over and over and over again, the problem has grown and grown and grown. And as the problem grows and grows and grows, so does the risk of replacing it, because the system's ever more complex. And so you end up with these very, very complex systems that have to be replaced in a very short period of time. It's risky, and the likelihood of failure becomes that much greater. And then when a system does fail, the result is that now you have to go back to that old system that was already obsolete and rely on it for more time, for a few more years. For us, it's not so much the software that becomes the issue, it's the hardware. Sometimes we're replacing mainframe systems built in the 1980s, where parts haven't been available for a decade or two. And the customer is relying on a stockpile of old parts that may or may not work. So they're always just one failure away from catastrophe. So this becomes this vicious circle where it becomes ever more urgent, the problem becomes bigger and bigger, the risk becomes greater, and the chance that they'll have to go back and rely on that old system becomes greater. So clearly there has to be a change. You can't keep, this cannot continue indefinitely. Systems are getting more complex and they have to be replaceable. So what we're trying to do is change the mindset so that rather than changing a whole system at a time, we go to a more incremental approach where a system's constantly being upgraded, updated with new technologies that coexist along with existing technologies. It's like a city. It would be lovely to be able to demolish a city and build a new city from scratch that's all modern, but you wouldn't dream of doing that. And you shouldn't be thinking today about replacing a whole computing system. You need to do it in incremental steps. So the approach we've been taking with our customers is to move to more of an agile methodology, where we build small systems and then add them into the system. We build something we call a minimum viable product, the smallest system we can come up with that will provide value, and then deploy that into the system, and then work from there, adding new systems around that base system that we built. It's a much more affordable approach. The budgetary needs are much lower. The whole process of getting approvals for it is that much lower, and it's much lower risk. So this allows us to get a complex but manageable system up and running much quicker. It's not a perfect solution. It does bring its own risks. Now we have to come up with a way in which the new system will work with the old system. When we're putting in a new XML system and we have to make it work with an old mainframe system, we have to create a lot of on-ramps and off-ramps between the two systems so the new system and the old system can work together. And that itself brings in complexities. We have to round trip between word processing tools and XML tools, and solve a lot of other problems that we wouldn't have had to otherwise solve. But we believe that in total, this approach is far more workable than undertaking the risk of replacing a whole system from the ground up.
Yeah, I can only totally agree with you that that's definitely that's the way to go. If you start from your MVP approach with an incremental approach, which part of the legislative process would you consider first for nixtamalization using Acoma and TOZO, and how to progress into the legislative process?
All right. So as a company, we have chosen to specialize in what we believe is the core of the heart of the system, the most difficult part of all, and that's the legislative drafting. So we focus first on the drafting of legislation, and then we start adding capabilities around that. We amending capabilities, publishing capabilities, and other tools that surround that, supporting documents, moving out from the heart of the system, and then growing outwards from there. XML, Acoma and TOZO really addresses that heart of that problem. Although it can handle many types of documents, the core of Acoma and TOZO is built around legislative drafting, and that's where we focus. And we've chosen as a company to focus on that area, mostly because it's the challenge, it's the difficult part. It's the part that people most struggle with. So we, maybe a little crazy way, decided to tackle the hardest problems first.
No, absolutely. But that's one way to go, and well, I would only support this way. Before coming to Alessandro, another question for you, Grant. There was an initiative that was performed by the United Nations, running a system on Ubuntu that was quite some years ago. It was, I think, at the end of the 90s, early 2000. And wanted to prepare a kind of universal platform for enabling parliaments to work and to draft the bills using an XML format. But then it failed, and it was not, let's say, as successful as what we could have expected working with United Nations. On your approach, what would you see a difference by this approach that was providing a single universal platform for all parliaments and the approach that you are proposing?
There are a few things that are different. That approach kind of was a little ahead of its time technologically. The technologies that it was relying on just weren't really ready yet. For us, the tools we have today are our third generation tools. So we've gone through a few steps down the way. One thing approach we're taking that's different is that we're not trying to create a single universal approach. We're looking at each set of legal traditions, legislative traditions, and building a solution around that particular set of legal traditions. There's the Westminster approach to law. There's the US states have a very specific way of doing it. The federal government has a very specific way of doing it. So we're adapting our tool to that need, to that niche, and then building on that, rather than, we don't believe there is a single universal solution that would span all the different legal traditions that exist around the world.
Yeah, I could only agree with you, and that's, I think you took a wise approach by trying to fit with the different traditions from parliaments that we have seen from yesterday with all the conferences that has been made, which are extremely different from one to the other one. Alessandro, inside the Federal Senate, is obsolescence managed decentrally by the technical teams themselves, or do you have a kind of central body that takes care of the various dimensions from obsolescence, whether it could be a technical obsolescence or infrastructure obsolescence or functional obsolescence? Well, all the dimensions that we traditionally link with obsolescence. So how is it done in the Federal Senate?
Obrigado pela pergunta, Ludovic. Antes eu peço desculpas, eu não cumprimentei o Grant. Olá, muito prazer. E é um prazer estar aqui com uma das pessoas, nos profissionais mundiais que padronizam a nossa querida indústria de TI. Parabéns, Grant. Ludovic, nós temos uma área de padronização de processos e produtos de software. E nós temos usado uma abordagem do Gartner, que é o Application Portfolio Management, em que ele categoriza os produtos, as aplicações, e tenta determinar um roadmap, né, uma jornada para aquele produto. Se eu vou descartar, se ele precisa ser modernizado, se ele precisa ser comprado, se ele é para ser desenvolvido internamente. Então, nós temos usado esse instrumento de governança de forma centralizada, não fica na mão das equipes de desenvolvimento nas pontas, para conseguir estabelecer um padrão e não deixar nenhum produto abandonado, ou seja abandonado funcionalmente, ou seja até por manutenção. Inclusive, nós avançamos no que é conhecido como Shadow IT, né? A TI nas sombras, são aqueles usuários, né, que acabam desenvolvendo pequenos produtos em Access, em outras plataformas acessíveis, não é? E a gente, na verdade, tem incentivado o desenvolvimento do usuário sob nosso controle. Então, ferramentas low-code como o Power Automate da Microsoft, o próprio Apex, Oracle Apex, né, da Oracle, a gente fomenta esse desenvolvimento controlado na ponta para manter uma governança. Então, sim, é centralizado, a gente tem se esforçado para evitar a proliferação de produtos despadronizados no Senado Federal.
And just to be maybe a little bit more specific on this question about the obsolescence management, do you have a kind of enterprise architecture scheme, which is, or enterprise architecture organization, which is in charge of supervising these different application portfolios that you were just describing?
Sim, nós temos, Ludovic. Me parece que você está falando de arquitetura de software. Se foi isso, sim. Essa equipe, então, essa equipe de arquitetura de software, ela prepara toda uma base, todo um alicerce, toda uma caixa de ferramentas para os desenvolvedores que estão próximos do negócio, próximos dos usuários. Então, usamos Java, né, arquitetado numa arquitetura de camadas em que vários componentes não são preocupação para os desenvolvedores. Padrão de tela, formação de itens de menu, autenticação, que mais? Enfim, componentes de integração, web service, alguns dados corporativos, né, nome das pessoas, tudo isso está pronto. Então, nós conseguimos subir um produto, mesmo corporativo, mais complexo, muito rapidamente, né, para que o desenvolvedor se concentre no negócio, nas regras de negócio, nos dados e não na tecnologia. Isso gera um pouco de conflito, às vezes, nas equipes, né, que querem explorar as tecnologias, querem construir as ferramentas, não é? Mas no mundo dos negócios, ou mesmo públicos, não há tempo, né? Não temos tempo para ficar a todo projeto explorando tecnologia, né? Então, precisamos de coisas pré-montadas, né? Pré-formatadas, pré-moldadas para que o desenvolvimento avance. Então, eu tenho raias de padronização, aplicações corporativas, né, tem uma arquitetura de desenvolvimento baseada em Java, aplicações departamentais, né, na linha do desenvolvimento descentralizado, a gente utiliza o Oracle Apex. Na área de BI, usamos Business Object e o Click, né, o Click View. Mobile, estamos ainda definindo, né, qual é a plataforma, tem várias, é uma área que está se consolidando, mas sim, eu não consigo centrar numa só, isso é impossível, né? Até seria ruim, contraproducente, mas eu preciso ter um norte para 5, 6 tecnologias, porque senão eu não consigo ser ágil no negócio.
Thank you very much, sir. Thanks a lot for your contribution to both of you, very appreciated. I think that there's a lot of insights for the participants to be able to think about. I think that if they want to connect to you, there will be a possibility through Legislate to be in touch for the modernization side that I'm thinking about with you, with Grant, or some approach to application portfolio management or enterprise architecture with you, Alessandro. And I really thank you for your words about keeping the traditions of the different houses and chambers so that you can adapt slowly at their own rhythm, but at the same time still providing modernization of the information system related to the legislative activities of the houses through agility, through minimum vital products and with an incremental approach, and on the side also taking into account the various dimensions of the products you have in-house and domains to which they applied, considering also compliance as being one of the drivers for the challenges. We are just on time. I would like to thank you very much again, Grant, Alessandro. Thanks a lot for your participation. Highly appreciated and very motivating comments that you provided, and I'm sure will give a lot of food for thought to the participants of this panel. So thank you very much.